morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to Inside the Writer's Studio, the podcast where we talk with writers about their lives, their craft, their business, and their latest work. I'm your host, Charlie Lovett, and our podcast is sponsored by Bookmarks. Bookmarks is a literary nonprofit whose programs include the largest annual book festival in the Carolinas. Come visit Bookmarks at our community gathering space and nonprofit independent bookstore in downtown Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Inside the Writer's Studio is also proud to be an affiliate of Libro FM, the audiobook platform that supports your local independent bookstore. Stay tuned at the end of the podcast for more information on Libro FM and a special offer. My guest today is Alice Bell, whose novel Grave Expectations has just been published in the US in September, though I had the pleasure of seeing it on the shelves of UK bookshops this spring. Alice, welcome to Inside the Writer's Studio.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So in your description of yourself, you write, and I'm quoting here from the description, Alice Bell has probably read more detective fiction than you. That I love that description, but it made me wonder what first got you excited about that genre? What lured you to it?
I think, well, first of all, I will say that description has come back to bite me on several counts. But I think that probably gives me enough leeway. But I think, like a lot of people, it was Agatha Christie who was my first kind of foray, I guess, when I was quite young. I'm the classic middle child, and I when my big brother went to university, I inherited his room, which had the bookshelves, just all the bookshelves were in my big brother's room, and everything was on there. So I just went in there when I was about 11 and then came out, 5 years later, sort of mostly formed, having read loads of books that probably I shouldn't have. And I read loads of Marple and Poirot, and then I found some Sherlock Holmes as well. So it was the kind of golden age detectives that I got stuck into, I think.
It fascinates me because I read a lot of Agatha Christie when I was the same age too, and I have a nephew who got really into Agatha Christie when he was that age. She wasn't writing novels for teenagers, but why do you think we all were drawn to her at that point in our lives?
I don't know. They're so I suppose timeless in a way, and then now there's a resurgence in wanting that kind of way of life, with cottagecore kind of teenagers now are like, I want to live in an unheated cottage. And having grown up in the countryside in England, I always say, I don't know if you do. But I think they're so well put together, and so many crime writers crib little bits here and there, just take little ideas. They are just such kind of well-oiled, intricate little devices that they just work and continue to work, and they're so charming, and some of them are so funny as well. The Marple ones, particularly, like Murder at the Vicarage, I think is my favorite. It's so funny.
Well, tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming a writer. What happened between you're 11 years old and reading Agatha Christie and now you yourself are writing detective fiction?
I know, I sometimes can't believe it. But I think a lot of people that studied English literature at university, I've always had a book in me. I've always tried to write, and I think over the years I've tried to write things that I was trying to write genres that I was into at the time. So I've tried to write fantasy and stuff, but something about during lockdown, I was just reading a lot of sort of the grim kind of bloody serial killer slicing people up fiction, which I love as well. Like I would never, do that down. I think there's absolutely a place for that, but I just wanted something a bit lighter. And so then I started reading a bunch of cozy crime, and I wanted from that, I think it's a classic sort of you write the book that you're sort of looking for but can't find. I wanted something that was a bit more of what was cozy for me, I think. But before that, I've been for 10 years I've been in games journalism, games media, so I write reviews of video games, which is completely the opposite end of the spectrum from Agatha Christie, really.
I don't know. I mean, I could imagine a Miss Marple video game working pretty well.
They've done a few, yeah, but in terms of herself, the style is quite
Yeah,
different, I suppose. But it does mean I'm very used to strong feedback from commenters
yeah,
and getting edited as well, which really does help, I think.
yeah. So I'm actually working right now on a mystery novel, and it's a little bit meta and a little bit cozy. And one of the characters, the mystery writer in this novel, writes what she considers to be the rules of the mystery novel. And her rules
Ooh.
include things like you don't introduce a new suspect in the last chapter and things like that. And I'm curious to know if did you have a set of rules of sort of guidelines of like here are the areas in which I have to stay to make this sort of fair to the reader and to the genre.
Yeah, I did. So I did try to, I think, make it so that you could figure it out yourself. Yeah. So no introducing the murderer. It's just someone we didn't know and had an unknown motive. I think even if you I just like it more that even if, maybe you don't meet and speak to the character, but they've been mentioned as, a presence, or, it's not that the first time they ever come up is when they get caught. So I do really like that. Um, I I don't know that I like the one. It's not really a rule, but the problem I have is that if you're trying to write a sort of golden age mystery now, you have to figure out what to do with mobile phones, or like
Yeah.
it's just harder to write a mystery that that where it can't just all be solved immediately by someone like sending a text. That's the problem I've been having, I think.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are writing novels that are set in sort of 1989 or 1990,
Mm,
just right before the
yeah.
the internet and mobile phones sort of made it all much more difficult to have that complexity of who knows what at when. Um, so this novel is populated with what one commentator called semi-helpful ghosts. The title Grave Expectations is obviously is an allusion to Charles Dickens, who wrote more than
Mm.
his fair share of ghost stories as well. Um, Tell us about the title and specifically why you wanted to reference Dickens.
Oh, do you know it went through a few different uh title iterations, and now for the series I think I'm locked in a pun death spiral for future titles. But uh I think it's sort of an allusion to the in it's a take on the kind of big stately, family home mansion thing. So it's a little bit an allusion to that kind of like um you know the main character Claire is like a struggling kind of working class and maybe aspirations being middle class person who's living sort of on the waterline a bit, and she comes to this kind of big weird crumbling English country manor and meets all these weird posh people, and I think as well Dickens was so good at drawing these weird sort of larger than life strange characters that you could also recognize a seed of something familiar in as well. um and of course the ghost thing as well. It was a pun, but also a pun that kind of works, I think. I hope, anyway.
So this is both a ghost story
Mm.
and a murder mystery. What why did you want to combine those two genres, and what about them do you feel like makes them work well together? Because I think they do work well together, but why?
But it's funny, I sort of always forget that it's, I guess, technically a fantasy or like a science fiction, like it's genre as well. um it's quite an unserious book in many ways, but the thing with ghosts, because I don't believe in ghosts, but I find them fascinating and I find horror fascinating. And I think what you're haunted by and what you find frightening is very honest. And the things that haunt you and that kind of follow you around and that you imagine are sticking around are kind of they tell you quite a lot, I think. And in this, the main character Claire is, yeah, she's millennial-ish, and she's struggling, and she's not really a proper grown up, and she is haunted by the ghost of her school age best friend who was, disappeared, was murdered when they were 17. And so that to me is sort of this very literal representation of being haunted by your past, but also as a millennial, you're sort of never allowed to grow up. And so Claire is stuck in this kind of arrested development, and then she's always followed around by this kind of teenagery presence, and then Sophie herself can literally never grow up. So there's kind of a tension between them, because Sophie is always really frustrated that Claire hasn't done more with her life. But Claire, her kind of point is that, well, I can't do anything with my life because you're here. Like, you're so weird, and you make me so weird and incapable of doing anything.
So the novel begins with Claire arriving at this, as you say, this sort of crumbling family home in the countryside. And just to help us a little bit with the setup, what is Claire? Why is she there?
So the family that she's there to visit, she was at university with the oldest daughter, whose name is Figgy. And every year for Halloween / the birthday of the sort of grandmother, the oldest, like the matriarch-ish, who's technically the owner of the house, they do a kind of little entertainment, and it's on one of them each year to sort of organize something to have as a little event. So I think the year before it was an a cappella song group did a little performance, a mashup song performance. And so this year it was Figgy's turn. And so she's decided we'll do a seance with this freelance medium that I was at university with, because she left it a bit last minute. And the place is haunted, quite haunted. So they think it'll be good fun to have a freelance medium there. But then Claire, while she's there, meets the ghost of a murder victim. So that's sort of where it all kicks off.
Yeah. And so I thought the way it started was wonderful, because you have Claire and Sophie are having these conversations, and I was like, well, why? Sophie's kind of like slightly undefined at the beginning. Like, I'm like, is this her sister? Is this her friend? Why isn't the author telling me who this person is? And then, of course, you do tell me who she is. And there's this sort of aha moment that she's been talking to this ghost all the time that nobody else can hear. So when you drop something like that, then were you structuring it towards that the whole way, or do you then go back and go, okay, I need to make sure that no other characters are responding to this person's voice. I need to be sure, that I've played fair with the reader up to this point, so that this surprising piece of information is logical with everything that's happened so far.
It was always the way I was structuring that first chapter, is to make, especially the conversations that they have in the car with Figgy, who comes to pick them up from the train station. I wanted it to feel a bit ambiguous as to whether Sophie and Figgy could talk to each other, if Figgy could hear and was responding to Sophie. And I suppose partly that was because I thought, oh, this is really good to, query to send to agents and stuff. It was quite a good like twist thing. But also I think it's fun if you pick it up and maybe you read it and you're not really sure. I thought it was quite a nice little twist and a nice little intro into it. Of course, the problem is you can't really sort of market the book without saying what the USB is really on the dust cover on the back. But I still like it. I just think it's a nice little moment.
Yeah, I think for me sometimes I don't love reading digital galleys, but the advantage of it is I often have not read the back cover or anything, and so for me it was a surprise. So one of the challenges I've faced in writing a mystery is that you need enough characters to keep the reader guessing, right? But you don't want so many characters that it becomes confusing. I mean, I just did a rewrite for my agent. She's like, you got to cut some characters out of this. There's too many characters. So it's this kind of delicate balance. Tell us about the ways in which you introduce characters to the reader so that they'll sort of stick in our minds and differentiate themselves from one another.
It's funny, I've just had exactly the same conversation for the sequel with my publishers. It's too many people. You have to cut at least one of these couples. I really tried to, because I grew up in that sort of area where I was like the quote unquote normal kid, and then you'd get like weird posh families in big houses in the middle of nowhere. And I try to, so first of all, stagger the introductions a little bit so that they're not, you do have them all in play for when you need them, but they're not quite uh all thrown at the reader at once. And then you can remove some pieces from the board later on as well. um I also try to, because I think it was Roger Ebert says it's the law of economy of characters. So like if one character turns up more than all the others, they're probably the murderer. So I try to kind of stay aware of that and kind of balance it so that everyone sort of turns up a few times and you get to see them a little bit, so you're not falling foul of that. And then I think it's very important to try and make them feel a bit larger than life, but not verge into them being caricatures, because I think you can make an exaggerated version of someone that everyone knows. So I think a good example is Figgy, who she's the first character they meet. They meet her by herself. She gives them a lift, so they get a little bit of time with her by themselves, and it's just her. And she's a very recognizable, posh, kind of horsey blonde girl. But then also she's a little bit, you'd feel a little bit sad for her because she's got a lot of like self-help books and relationship books and stuff in her room and things like that when they go and talk to her later. So I think it's the staggering the introductions for me is helpful. The giving them all a little bit sort of exaggerated traits, but then that kind of recognizable human side as well. And the other thing as well is that sometimes in murder mystery you can cheat and do like a fun like dramatis personae list in the front as well. So
Yeah, I mean, you do have a family tree in the front, which
yeah.
again to me is another great argument for reading a physical book because it's so much easier to
Mm.
flip back. But my wife actually goes, just take a picture of it, just take a screenshot of it, and then I'm like, oh, duh. But tell us a little bit about that, because it's not just a family tree; it's kind of like annotated and
Yeah.
really, it's actually. I mean, that diagram not only helps us with the characters, but it gives us some insight into the character who wrote the family tree and to sort of what kind of book this is going to be. So tell us about sort of that setup.
Yeah, this was an idea that came a bit later after I'd done all the edits, and we were just talking about putting the physical proofs and things together. And I think it was the American editor who suggested adding it. So it's a family tree, but it's been annotated by Alex, who is the youngest member of the Wellington Forge family of posh weirdo suspects. They are 19 and they're kind of a bit rudderless. They don't know what they want to do with their life, really. They sort of want to be an artist or maybe Joe, and they've not gone to university. But they are one of the main supporting cast. They sort of form part of the Scooby gang of investigators that help solve the murder. So they join up with Claire and Sophie, and they are quite they live with their uncle Basher, and Basher and Alex are supposed to be a sort of mirror to Sophie and Claire, because Basher is quite grown up, and he owns a flat that he lives in, and he used to have a proper job. And then Alex is a young teenage person, but they're the new generation. Alex is a Zoomer, I guess. So they are energetic and weird, and they have a lot of opinions, and they've scrawled all over the family tree at the start, which I hopefully helps give you a little bit of a hook
Yeah.
to the family, and also, as you say, a little bit of insight into how Alex thinks about all the people in their family as well.
Yeah, I have to say, Alex, I probably have less in common with Alex than any other character in this book. And yet she's my favorite character in the book. They're my favorite character in the book. And that slip of the tongue brings up this
Yeah.
notion that you never actually come out and say Alex is non-binary, or Alex just uses they pronouns.
Mm.
And can you talk a little bit about how we can use fiction as a way to normalize somebody who uses they pronouns, somebody who's non-binary, somebody who's queer, it's somebody who's in a marginalized community, that sort of not drawing attention to it does a different thing than drawing attention to it.
Yeah, I think because I obviously I'm not a member of that community myself, but I, it sounds like a joke to say, but some of my closest friends are non-binary, um, and I wanted to have, talking about things that are cozy to me. It is very familiar to me to, have a non-binary person, in my friendship group.
Mhm.
And I thought that was also kind of a good counterweight if we're talking about mirroring, Alex and Sophie, and thinking about the new generation and things like that. So I wanted to have a non-binary character, but also them just be chill and normal, and not really be referenced and talked about. So it's like Alex is not, unhappy. Their family, it's never referenced their family are unsupportive. Their family, are potentially murderers, but they have no problem with, Alex being non-binary. In the scene where they're introduced, actually, there was a bit where it was explicitly stated that, oh, Alex uses they them pronouns. But then I thought, well, if that's the only character that I do that for, then that is not making it chill and normal and not a big deal, so it's just a thing, in the book. And I thought that, not wanting to have like a kind of tragedy like issue representation for Alex, but just have them be like a fun kind of normal chill person who's just enjoying their life and like, having the same maybe like issues that adolescents have sometimes. Just felt like a normal way to, have that character.
I think that's so important that we do that in our fiction, that just again to just normalize whatever sort of characters.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, let's move from human beings to former human beings for a minute, and talk about ghosts. We talked earlier a little bit about the rules, quote unquote, of writing a mystery. When you introduce an element of the supernatural, whether it's magic or ghosts or whatever, you almost have to set up your own rules and parameters for how that works. And you do that. You have sort of rules about ghosts, who they are, how they act, what they can and can't do. Tell us a little bit about developing that. And were those solely your own, or did they come from other sources? And how did you sort of create this world beyond just saying these are ghosts?
So it kind of developed a little bit over time, and it was the case that I wanted to have rules, and I wanted to then not break them, and I'm not intending to kind of introduce new rules necessarily, because I feel like that's a bit cheaty, but they weren't explicitly stated until one of my editors was like, you just need to do a paragraph where you say this is what happened, because otherwise the reader doesn't know. In my head it was all fixed. So there are some rules where they can't interact with things physically. They look like either they look like some aspect of what they look like when they're alive, whether that be when they were at their happiest or when they died. That's usually the deal. They can't talk to people, but they can wander about, and if they don't sort of keep themselves together, ghosts will kind of forget who they are and turn into like a kind of weird little mist. So they have to have some sort of purpose, otherwise they just kind of forget and drift away. And then the rules can be sort of broken, but to a dramatic effect, because then, if they get broken, then the reader will go, oh my god, that's what's going on. And so Claire is kind of a vehicle for that as well, because she can be used by ghosts as a battery pack, basically. So they can do more.
I love the fact that for so many of these ghosts, the reason they're hanging around is petty. It's not
spite.
Some big huge thing.
Yeah. Well, because I think that that's most of our grievances are kind of petty, aren't they? Not many people have like a big reason for unfinished business. It's mostly because like nobody's looking after the rose garden properly or whatever.
So did you read a lot of other ghost stories when you were developing this, or you just sort of completely on your own thought about how you wanted them to work? How do you see this fitting into other kind of ghost narratives in the English literature canon?
So the one that I think about the most is called The Ghost of Thomas Kemp by Penelope Lively, which is a children's book that I loved when I was younger, and I go back to it quite a lot. And I like that because he's a poltergeist, but he's a very petty poltergeist, and he just kind of gets annoyed about stuff. And he's largely the conflict in the book is him trying to get the young boy who lives in his house now to kind of tell people how good and clever he is and do stuff for him. And it's all very petty stuff, and like he turns up and he leaves like a rude message on a teacher's chalkboard because he doesn't agree with the science and history being taught and things. It's just all very petty stuff like that, which I think is great.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's obviously we can tell from talking to you, there's a lot of humor in this book and in the way that you deal with the ghosts. But there's also some kind of, I don't want to say dark moments. I mean, there are dark moments, but the one
Yeah.
that really struck me is she says people would enjoy Marble Arch much less if they could see how many yellowing skeletons were sitting on the benches beside them. And of course, as you point out, this was the site of public execution.
Yeah.
Um, Talk a little bit about the burdens of Claire's ability to see ghosts and how those burdens kind of open up this world of history that most of us never really think about in our daily lives, especially in a place like London, or where there's so many centuries of history.
I think one of the things that kind of started this really was I was thinking about, well, how if you because I wanted to do a book where the citizen detective was a medium who could see ghosts, and then I was thinking, well, if you could see ghosts, that would actually be kind of awful because it would affect every part of your life from day to day, because people have died everywhere,
Yeah,
and not in nice ways. And then if you go to somewhere like London, the history of London is so bloody,
yeah,
and now has been built over, with parks and nice, tourist attractions. Like, imagine if you went to the Tower of London and you could see, the ghosts of everyone that had been beheaded there. And so that was really just born out thinking, like, yeah, God, it would be awful. And you would feel, Claire spends a lot of her time basically not trying to make eye contact with
yeah,
ghosts, because they so basically no one can see them, and they're so desperate all the time to be heard and talk to people. And that's such a kind of weight, if you're that person, that's such a weight for you to have on your shoulders that you just sort of ignore it, I think.
yeah. So when you begin a mystery, what comes first for you? Is it the characters? Is it the setup? Is it the murder? Is it the solution? I mean, a mystery writer has to present information to
Mm.
readers in a very specific order, but in what order does that information actually come to you?
I so Mine are quite character driven. I sort of usually start with the premise. So I want to I'm working on the second book now, and that is a sort of take on the sort of Lucy Foley style, big group of friends go on a holiday and someone gets murdered, and there's there are some weirdos that aren't part of our group, maybe they did it. And then so in this, the weirdos are Claire and Sophie,
Yeah,
basically. So um so then I start with that. That's the kind of the big picture concept, and then I think, right, what is the group that's going on holiday, basically? Why are they friends? And then from that, I'm like, right, one of them's going to get murdered. Who would murder them and why? And then I work backwards from that. So this person gets murdered. This is who murdered them, and then around that, I sort of thread reasons that the other characters would want to murder them, and try and weave in, the red herrings and the other threads. So
yeah.
I sort of go backwards and then forwards again.
For me, one of the great joys is figuring out a reason why everybody
Yeah,
would have a motive to murder whoever it is that got murdered. That
yeah,
there's
yeah,
great.
yeah.
I think there's great fun in that. Well, let's talk a little bit about the beginnings and the ends of chapters.
Mm.
You choose to title your chapters, which I really like that in a mystery, because then the title itself becomes sort of like this mini mystery
Yeah.
to unpack as we move our way through the chapter. And like many mystery writers, you have a great ability to end a chapter with a twist or a bang or something surprising. Um, so talk to us a little bit about the art of chapter writing, from title at the beginning to sort of cliffhanger at the end.
So I am a long chapter writer. So you find a lot in thrillers and stuff, especially. They have this really great short, just one more kind of bite-sized chapters that are a few pages. My chapters are a bit longer, and that is difficult because I sort of want to have the feeling of, rather than it being a thrilling thing keeping you awake, it's more like having a bath, hanging out with some friends, a chance to kind of soak a little bit in some of the chapters. And so I really struggle with figuring out like how long is too long, and if I bolt this bit on here, which would actually be quite a good place to end it, would that be too long? So I usually have to think about where I want to end the chapter before I start writing it. And then sometimes I have to synthesize chapters out of bits from different ones, especially when I'm editing. And a lot of the time with the endings, then because I plan the ending, I can sort of think about what is then a good title. A lot of the titles are just jokes, actually, in fairness. They're little jokes or associations, or yeah, little jokes that you want to get. I think my favorite in Grave Expectations is one of the chapters ends with Basher saying, do not under any circumstances get on a train to London and investigate, this person's office. And then the next chapter, over the page, the title is The Gang Get on a Train and Go to
Yeah.
London. Which made me laugh, if no one else.
No, I mean, I think we like those kind of little narrative surprises, and also I like that kind of link from one chapter to the next, which a title gives you a chance to do.
Yeah.
One of the other rules that my fictional mystery writer talks about is she's very fond of the Aristotelian unities of time, space, and action. And one of the things I notice about a lot of mysteries take place over a pretty short time period, and in a pretty limited physical place. The country house out in the
Yeah.
to what extent did you want to try to sort of contain time and space in this book, or in any of the books that you foresee in this series?
Well, in this one, I wanted it to take place a little bit longer space of time, but still have kind of an endpoint on it in mind. So, because I wanted the characters to get to know each other a little bit, but I also didn't want to drag it out for months and months. So this starts with a character dying who is not the murder victim, but a character dies, and then the end point is the funeral. So it's is it a couple of weeks? I think it's a couple of weeks. Yeah, I looked up like average time till funeral in the UK, and I was like, boom, there we go. So I did want to give myself a cap, but still have a little bit more time. But then the next one it's a closed loop. It's a bottle episode, so it's a few days on an island, and someone dies and they're all trapped together.
I do love the fact that in this book, the first person who dies is not the murder victim. We sort of go along for a little while thinking, okay, that's the murder. Now we're going to have to solve it. And then, her ghost just says, no, I wasn't murdered. And the reader's left like, okay. But I mean, to have a death itself be a red herring, if you will. I'm not sure I've run into that one before. Claire is a fan of a particular police procedural TV show.
Yeah.
And she's a fan, even though, or maybe because of the fact that the pattern is always the same. She says, you can tell who the murderer was based on who appeared on screen when.
Yeah.
We seem to, but I mean, I think that's true of like almost every police procedural TV show. I mean, there's this ongoing joke in America that like whoever whoever's the top star, if they don't end up dead, then they're definitely the killer.
Yeah.
Why do you think we like those kind of patterns in our mysteries? What is it about? We want both the predictable and the unpredictable simultaneously, right?
I love that's why I wanted to have a police procedural in it, and it's called Murder Profile, and it's just an amalgamation of all police procedurals, basically. Um, uh, but like, I think it's because it's comforting because you want the bad guys to get caught and to the day be saved and it be okay in the end. And in real life, it's kind of not like that always, and people don't get their comeuppance always. And so it's nice to have that kind of comforting rhythm where you can see someone get caught, and the good guys prevail. But after a while, yeah, you do want that little twist thrown in just to change it up a little bit. But I rewatch things over and over again that I've seen before just because I want to go on the same journey again.
So and you talked about your Agatha Christie being an influence.
Mm.
Well, what about non-book mysteries? Whether it be a television show or a film, or is that a source that you look to also for, whether it be for structure or for character or for just seeing cool crimes?
Yeah, a little bit. So I sort of cheat because it Midsummer Murders came from a book series, but I
Yeah.
love Midsummer Murders, which is long exhausted the books now. I think it's on like series 25 or something. I love Midsummer Murders because they have to come up with increasingly ingenious ways for people to die in this small English county, which they should do an episode about someone saying why is the survival rate, why is the
Yeah.
murder rate in
I've
this
always thought
small part of England
Oxford's a
so
very
high.
dangerous town to live in.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, Morse is another great one.
Yeah.
Then there's Death in Paradise, which I love, which is about just like an English detective moving to Caribbean island and just solving crimes there and being uncomfortable. Um, and that's great as well because it has a really fun uh, opening credits song. So it'll like start with someone discovering a really awful murder and screaming, and then it'll go into like trumpets immediately. It's great.
Well, one of the other characters that you've mentioned in our conversation is Basher. This is Alex's uncle, I believe. Uh,
Yes.
and Basher at one point suggests that Claire, because she seems to be good at these kind of things, should maybe join the police. And she says she would rather be dead. And she says, quote, giving voice to the contradiction at the heart of her murder mystery obsession. Tell us about both her obsession and the contradiction at its heart.
So the millennial women love murder. A lot of people love murder. They love true crime. It's a huge thing. People love it. The reason murder mysteries are so popular, both in film and books and TV, and the Glass Onion and Knives Out are hugely successful, popular. The people love them, but then I think it would be disingenuous of me to write a mystery like this that is about uh millennials and younger people and bashers and ex-cop. I was like, I need to have someone who sort of knows what they're doing in there, so that's kind of Basher's role. He's the adult, but it'd be disingenuous to write it without sort of mentioning and at least gesturing towards the fact that there's an anxiety in my generation about the role of the police and how that figures into everything, and it's a weird one because so many mystery writers are ex-cops or they're married to cops or they're part of that world, but it's still true that people my generation and younger are just a little bit kind of leery of it these days.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important thing I don't think I should pretend that isn't the case,
Okay. Well, we like to end every episode of Inside the Writer's Studio with the same 10 questions. You should be able to answer each of them in just a few words, but hopefully it'll give us insight into you and into your writing. So if you're ready, we will begin. What word do you love to work into your writing?
Wool. I'm following the comedian. So, oh God, what's his name? Stuart Lee, the comedian, works wool into all of his stand-up sets, and I'm trying to do the same thing.
What word do you hate to encounter in other people's writing?
Or moist. I hate the word moist. It never heralds anything good.
Where's your favorite place to write?
Beanbag. Got a big XL beanbag in my living room.
Where could you never write?
I actually really have trouble writing in cafes because there's just too many people and distractions around me. I'm like the dog in Up. I'm squirrel. I'm like get too distracted. So I need to be silent in a locked room in the dark, basically.
To what rule of grammar do you pay least attention?
I don't. Well, I know quite a lot of them, I think, because I try and write dialogue, especially the way that people actually talk.
Yeah.
So probably all of them.
That's fair.
Yeah.
What was the first book you remember reading?
First one I ever remember reading. Well, when did I really kind of come online? I reckon it would be a Ladybird book. Oh, Famous Five. It would be Famous Five. I love Famous Five. Kids mystery. There you go.
Yeah. What are you reading now?
What am I reading right now? I am actually reading. It's called Myrtle. It's a collection of logic puzzles as seen on Myrtle.com, which is like Wordle but murder. You get like a daily logic puzzle, and there's a book out now called Myrtle. It's the first volume. It's 100 puzzles, but it also has a plot.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds great.
Secret codes and things. It's really good. Yeah.
What book would you like to have written?
Good Omens.
Oh, yeah.
Both for the royalties and because it's a very good book.
Yeah. What sort of book would you like to write but probably never will?
Like a sci-fi, like a hard sci-fi, I think. I don't think I'm built for it, but I'd love to.
And finally, what would you like to hear a reader tell you?
I would love to hear a reader say that they wish they could be friends in real life with the gang in the book. That's what I'm aiming for, I think.
This has been Inside the Writer's Studio. I'm your host, Charlie Lovett, and my guest today has been Alice Bell, whose novel Grave Expectations will be available September 5th, wherever books are sold. Alice, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been really fun.
Inside the Writer's Studio is sponsored by Bookmarks, a literary nonprofit that runs the largest annual book festival in the Carolinas and operates a community gathering place and nonprofit independent bookstore in downtown Winston-Salem, North Carolina. To find out more about Bookmarks and all its programs, visit www.bookmarksnc.org. Inside the Writer's Studio is proud to be affiliated with Libro FM. Unlike other audiobook platforms, Libro FM supports your local independent bookstore. Whether you buy a single book or, like me, a monthly subscription, you can link your account to your local store or to Bookmarks to support literary community. For a special 2-for-1 offer, go to libro.fm and use the discount code WRITERS. If you've enjoyed Inside the Writer's Studio, please consider leaving a rating or review online at Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Inside the Writer's Studio posts new episodes on the 1st and 15th of every month. On upcoming episodes, I'll be talking to authors who will be visiting us for the Bookmarks Festival of Books and Authors here in Winston-Salem on September 23rd. Until then, thanks for listening, and may you read with wonder and write with passion.